Since the widespread use of cars in cities all around the world, car lanes have taken over most street space. Parking lots were officially and unofficially appearing on every corner, taking over old squares, plazas, or even public green lawns. Already in the 1950s, it was clear this is going to be a problem for Central European cities, even when, compared to the Western world, car numbers were still very low. New city projects dealt with this by simply building on very large areas and using functional separation. But what about old city centers with limited space? Cars were simply everywhere in those. So let's see what was done about it, how cities returned their focus to their centers to once again make them attractive to people. Some 200-300 years ago, city streets were intended for everything: walking, gathering, moving cargo on horse carriages, and doing business. Something like purely a pedestrian zone, or on the other hand, purely a closed-off highway, in other words, functional separation, was not really a thing. Trams appeared, but mostly mixed into the rest. It was also the time period when people could just freely jump on and off moving trams in city centers. Cars finally appeared, but they were also initially mixed into the rest without any rules. Some rules started to emerge, lanes and such, but the old situation remained, where cars could go just about anywhere, into the tight alleys, backyards of blocks, squares, and so on, since that's how it always was. Car numbers went up. Planners of cities were certainly aware that this is already a problem which will only grow worse. The modernist plans in Central Europe from the roughly 1950s forward envisioned the functional separation, so building huge places for cars, but on the other hand, places only for pedestrians. It's doable in the new projects, but what about the old city centers? This is simply not a solution for 17th century Renaissance streets, but not even the relatively new city blocks from the early 20th century. So the old principles of everything can go anywhere remained, but obviously modern cars won and pushed pedestrians aside, literally. This was far from the ideal situation, but city planners were simply focusing elsewhere in the 50s to 70s on the new projects, the greenfield projects or total city reworks, where it was just so much easier to build the nice and shiny new visions. Old city streets decayed in this time period without much care. But thinking eventually started to change, and cities returned their focus to places they already had. But there are exceptions. The very first, and actually huge, pedestrian zone in Czechoslovakia opened already in 1967, encompassing a big part of the city center of Ostrava. Old pictures nicely show the progression here. We can find photos from roughly the 1930s, where that mixed situation is still clear. Also trams going right through the middle. Next picture is from 1961. The square was cleaned, quotation marks, by removing all fixed structures and politically unacceptable statues. Frequency of cars and trucks increased, and it's quite obvious how the space is much more divided between sidewalks and car lanes. 60s, more cars and need to park them, although the center of the square remained a pedestrian plaza. And finally, after 1967, the entire area was turned over to pedestrians, declaring an official pedestrian zone. That big parking lot down there, that's actually a place of demolished old buildings where a new big department store will eventually be built. Notice all the people around the square, absolutely everywhere. Practically all of the streets radiating from the square were now a pedestrian zone, making the center here very lively. But old pictures show that common trend of decaying city centers still. Money was just spent elsewhere rather than repairing the dirty facades. The surface changed. This picture shows nicely how the sunken car lanes were just filled with asphalt, covering old cobblestone to level it with the sidewalks. It's not exactly creating a great surface, considering the huge area. This was fixed in 2007 for the square and 2015 for the nearby street, also drawing from the European Union's funds for such projects, as we talked about it before. Another Czechoslovak earlier transformations happened in Prague, despite Prague somewhat being a meme these days with cars everywhere. Well, it used to be a lot worse. The latest Metro Line B started to be built, among other places, under the historical central areas. As part of it, those areas would be pedestrianized. Here are some pictures from before and after at the Republic Square. It used to be pretty much completely reserved for road traffic, hardly functioning as a square. Today's state is the result of that 1985 pedestrianizing due to metro construction, but the overall full removal of cars happened in 2006. The nearby lower end of the Wenceslav Square, together with the branching streets and smaller plazas, were turned over to the pedestrians too in 1985. Some of these streets actually had quite busy multi-lane roads. This part has cars removed completely, at least officially, and it's crazy to think today that there even were cars. It seems so obvious they are gone just because there are so many people here all the time that couldn't possibly fit on sidewalks only. But maybe, just maybe, it's a case of because there is a pedestrian zone, there are so many people and so many businesses around. There are actually so many pedestrianizing projects, larger and smaller, in many, if not all, major Czech cities from the 1980s forward. The trend was quite clear, and not just here, but also in the neighboring countries, to return the focus back to city centers, somehow revitalizing them and making them more attractive to people, to spend time there, but also to spend money there, not just herd everyone into the shopping malls. Just closing streets to cars was, of course, not enough. The places actually needed to be made nicer, surfaces repaved, buildings maintained, or accessories added. That gradually started to happen already from the 80s, but so much more in the 90s and 2000s. Later then, partially using the EU funds. Poland went through similar changes, likely due to its financial situation a little later, but it was firmly into it by the 2000s. A huge city rework was done in Katowice at the Market Square. Interestingly, it was a result of a 2005 public survey where people called for something to be done with the square. The old pictures from the 80s show the square covered with asphalt, dirty old buildings around, with a few new modernist ones. The bold rework started in 2010 and was finished in 2016, creating a massive pedestrian tram plaza. Buildings around were refurbished, the modernist ones quite drastically. I showed pictures of some in some previous videos. New flowers were planted, accessories added, and so on. These sort of changes of city squares continue all around the region. Listing every country and city would take forever, but the story is pretty much always the same, and I feel like you already get the idea from these examples. Just like the pictures before and after are always the same. First, lots of cars, then a contemporary city plaza. The pedestrianizations of old places are certainly not specific to a single decade, as I try to outline. Some rarely started very early, but mostly from the 80s and then all the way to this day. Pretty much every year of the 21st century, if we consider the entire region, some old square or some old street somewhere gets reworked, removing most of the cars. More often than not, it's actually the smaller cities or even towns that do these projects, heavily drawing from the various EU rural development funds. Some small cities are very old, aiming to rebuild their historical look. Sometimes the projects are quite controversial, especially regarding greenery, because they aim to get rid of it, but then again with the aim of turning the place into a big event or market area where people could gather in larger numbers. On one hand, it makes sense. But on the other hand, the question then is if those events will actually happen, if the city will care to liven it up after the rework is done, after the EU money has been spent. The reality of today's world, unfortunately, is that people and businesses leave the smaller towns, so the reworked squares could easily become a little abandoned if it's not a touristy area. Well, anyways, let's now go to our city down here. I built this Oldtown square in the Altengrad series in like episode 2 or 3, something like that. So this is literally going back to the beginning. And it really shows because when I went here, some of the surfaces, some of the techniques that I've used here are absolutely ancient. The corners with procedural objects, I kind of got some really weird flashbacks because especially the corners, those rounded corners on intersections between roads, if I wanted custom decals there, I had to turn them into procedural objects and just like fiddle with that. There were so many procedural objects, like individual objects on the intersections. So this was really crazy to think back on it, and I was really glad when I was doing this refurbishment to get rid of it and do it the modern way, so with intersection marking tools. So this entire area was actually heavily optimized when it comes to the game, City Skylines, because I got rid of so many procedural objects. You could have seen that, so many different weird objects. For example, this more pink-ish colored cobblestone. That's intersection marking tools. You have seen that in the time lapse, how I just did it with networks. There is basically like a, I think, invisible highway network running down below this square, this plaza, which is like a holder for this decal. So, that's working great. I don't have to use so many different objects. I'm not absolutely sure how it affects performance when you use intersection marking tools instead of actual decals, but it definitely, saves the prop limits and procedural objects. And over the years, we have seen a couple of people already run into some serious problems with, many procedural objects in the game. So I don't really want to run into those issues. So every chance I get with these old places, I like to, switch to the more contemporary techniques in City Skylines. So that's exactly what happened over here. This was a very satisfying rebuild. Oh yeah, by the way, there's a building on this square. You can see it. You will see it in the cinematics. Actually, I paid attention to it there. There was a gap in the building line in here. There used to be some kind of. I had to look at the old video. Actually, there used to be like a half timbered house there in the upper portion of the square. Yeah, right now there on the upper side. I had no idea when it disappeared. I think I noticed it like a year ago already, but it was probably gone even earlier. So maybe you are going to see that in some opening shots that there is a gap in the Old Town Square. So I replaced it with a modern building. It was actually a great opportunity to put something new on the square. And to be completely honest, I kind of wish that these things were happening more often in the city. I was usually complaining about this very heavily in my Aurelia series when some random buildings were just, for example, removed from the workshop, so they suddenly disappeared from the city center, and I had to figure out which buildings they were. I had to go to my backup. That's, by the way, when I started doing the backups of my workshop folder into my local folder. But in Altengrad, I don't really mind these because it just gives me opportunity to replace it with something different. So that's exactly what I did there. I just used like an actual building version, not turned into procedural objects, a building version of some shop, and then I put a grass roof over it so that even from looking at it from the top, you're immediately going to notice that there's something new. So then I redid all the surfaces, like I said, mostly using intersection marking tools, a couple of procedural objects here and there if I needed to because of some corners or details, things like that. Then I made the square very walkable with the pedestrian paths. I, of course, removed the parking lot, some cars from around. I had to rework the building spawn points because majority of buildings on that square are commercial buildings. They require some resupply, gameplay-wise. So I moved those spawn points to more convenient locations at some entrances so that we don't have the resupply trucks just moving around the square too much. Obviously, in real life, these places are not completely blocked off to vehicle traffic because the shops need to be resupplied. That's absolutely fine. But they are blocked to the through traffic. If you don't have any business in the square, then you're not supposed to be there with your vehicle. That's kind of how it works with a lot of the pedestrian zones in real life. They are not completely car free. Now, this second place, that's like a tram intersection area. It used to be actually really clunky. You're going to see that in the before shot a little in the cinematics, where the cars are just blocking trams and pedestrians, even like gameplay wise. And yeah, it was just not particularly ideal. This is not really like a super busy area for cars, so I could easily afford to just get rid of car lanes completely on those tram stops and have the tram stops so much more convenient for people. Now, when I did all of this, I noticed that there are actually quite a lot of personal vehicles moving up to the castle hill. So I decided to build this like a small shuttle bus line, which is going to just cross some of these tram lines. And I was hoping that people are just going to transfer from the trams to the buses. For example, I'm going all the way to that Socialist Realism hotel there. There is like a big tram intersection. Lots of people go through here. So I was really thinking that that bus line is going to be used. There is actually something similar in Prague. I've never used that bus because, you know, it's just so much better to just walk to the Castle Hill or in the surrounding areas. But it's there. It's like a touristy bus. And it uses very tiny buses with only a single door. So I tried to download from the workshop something similar. I eventually got these Turkish buses, which are actually decade appropriate, or well, close to it at least. And so they are basically the shortest normal looking buses that I could find. Yeah. There are those like van looking buses, but I really wanted to get these, and they fit perfectly. They are good size for this place. Gameplay wise, unfortunately, no one really uses them. So the assumption that people are just going to transfer from the trams has not exactly been met. But maybe in time, people will. I mean, some people do use it, so, you know, a couple of cars were saved. So yeah, these are the cinematics. This is exactly that new building there, just tucked in that street line, a little bit behind to not draw attention to it from the nicer buildings all around. And look at how busy the square is. I built so many event generators in here so that even tourists go to this area. Unfortunately, tourists are more likely to do the pocket car thing. So, you know, I had to re-record these cinematics a couple of times so it doesn't happen too much. But oh well, that's just the price to pay for this. This tram stop, has always been super busy, and right now the people are just walking absolutely everywhere. That's really nice to see. Some of the nearby streets are not exactly all that busy as I would like, but that's actually also happening in real life. Some of these refurbished city streets, you know, they need to have the density and the businesses to have that appropriate liveliness to it. And, you know, then it's kind of self-sustaining with the density and businesses in the future. So some streets in real life just don't really get that right balance, so they are a little bit abandoned. That's the case, for example, in Ostrava, as I have shown. Some of the streets there struggle with that, and well, in Altengrad, we seem to have that too. This is the second place that the tram intersection, I just turned it into a pedestrian zone, redid some of the surfaces, there is the market happening in front of the church right now, and it's just flowing so much better. The cars are just bypassing the area, as you can see, absolutely fine. They really don't need to cross in front of the hospital building or university building. I forgot what was the intention of it originally. So it's fine. It's absolutely fine. Traffic manages, tram manages, and it's okay. This particular shot, yeah, these low FOV shots over some of the areas. Look how busy they are. That's just so nice about city skylines. How when you do something, then you can just put people in there. But even the cars are, you know, nice when they are moving through some areas. So that's very rewarding. Anyways, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching it. If you liked it, then please do all the things below the video. You know it. And huge thanks to channel members who directly support this channel and me and what I'm doing in here. Big thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Take care. Goodbye.